your name and it kind of, wiggles to show that there's something being recorded on your side. I'm
Yeah.
not seeing that on my side, because I saw a little blip there when you just started talking, but mine is just a constant flat line. So I'm not sure if there's
Okay. I
something.
am
Do you see
seeing,
that too?
yeah, I'm seeing the wave. It's very small, but it is there.
And it's
So
there for me as well.
yes, that's right.
Okay. So it might just be a visual glitch on my part. Or,
Yeah, we'll find out after this, but
I mean, the sound is coming to you, so it would stand to reason that it's also being recorded as well. But
that's right. All right, and we have started recording as well.
absolutely, yeah.
So there it's a good way in. All right, hey, so wow, season 1, episode 1 of This Should Work. We have Jake Juracka with us. Jake, I've known for, how long have I known you for now, Jake? 8 years, something like that?
Yeah, you were my very first professor freshman year at DePaul University.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
I don't
that was
know whether I should
2016.
apologize for that or be honored, but maybe I'll do both. So Jake is currently the technology manager at Northwestern's Garage, which is an innovation space at Northwestern in Evanston, Illinois. Jake can tell you a little bit more about that. Before that, Jake and I actually worked together at DePaul University, where I ran the Idea Realization Labs and hired Jake some amount of years ago. Was an excellent employee and student, and I'm very excited to see you at Northwestern right now and thriving. So why don't we, I kind of gave the nickel tour of what you're doing, but could you, how about, could you describe your role and the garage's primary mission and goals and things like that for the folks who are listening?
Absolutely, yeah. So the Garage is the Student Entrepreneurship Center for Northwestern University. Essentially, we provide free resources of all kinds to students in any stage of startup development, whether they're looking to start something creative and trying to find some ideas, or whether they're coming to us with a dedicated business venture in mind and want to be supported in that in several concrete ways. The Garage is extracurricular. We're not under or related to any particular section of campus, which means that we are open to any students of any background. And that allows a wide range of creative ventures, from obviously the most obvious and most evident startups in this day and age, which is digital goods and services, apps, and business to business stuff, but also consumer goods, medical innovations, food products, the full gambit. And it's great to see the incredible range of creativity that comes from our students developing in our space.
I'm going to touch on in a little bit, Jake, some of the programming that you all do to support those endeavors. I know there's a fund that's set aside for student groups. I know that the folks who direct the Garage, have a book out that I've actually read about, how to successfully support student startups and all that's interesting. But we'll get to that in a second. And I know you weren't at the Garage when at its inception, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, if you know anything about what motivated the establishment of the Garage at Northwestern, especially it being, as you said, not necessarily directly affiliated with academics and kind of its current mission and goals.
Absolutely, yeah. So the Garage was founded in 2015 by Melissa Kaufman. So Melissa, through her dealings with Northwestern University, saw that there was a community of students who were entrepreneurs, who were starting their own companies, who were getting creative, going out there taking risks, but the university itself had no dedicated infrastructure or programming to support that. At the time, the only entrepreneurship or business oriented entity on campus was INVO, the Innovations and New Ventures office. This office was in charge of monetizing and helping faculty to turn their university research or university IP into viable business strategies. And while this did offer an outlet for university research that was looking to be monetized, there's a strong proponent of students who were working on their own stuff, their own creative adventure, their own creative innovations that were separate from university research. So that was the impetus for developing the garage. Melissa put in the bid for getting this entire space, all 11,000 square feet that was previously earmarked for individual office space, and had that developed from the ground up to be a student-focused entrepreneurship center.
Some things are sounding similar, ringing a bell. Some things might be a little bit different, and this is where we perhaps diverge a little bit from the script. But I was wondering if you could tell me, I mean, what similarities, having worked at the idea realization labs at DePaul University, which I founded and then ran for a number of years. What similarities and what differences as well do you see from the space, if any, in either category? And let's just talk about that.
Of course, yeah. So to provide some background, I worked at Jay's IRL space, the Idea Realization Lab, from, man, it was the end of my freshman year all the way through to well past the graduation point, technically. And so this space, the IRL provided a, open format makerspace, for any students, staff, or alumni and faculty at DePaul for any creative purpose. A lot of similarities can be seen between the IRL and at least my portion of the garage, which encompasses the makerspace, just because all of my knowledge, for that matter, on makerspace management, utilizing and maintaining equipment, and training students on how to use it, I learned from my time at the IRL. So in that regard, the setup, layout, and general ethos of my makerspace here within the garage is, very familiar to anyone who's seen the IRL. Another similarity would probably be the wide array of students who come to use this space. I would imagine that a lot of university maker spaces, especially ones that house advanced equipment like 3D printers and CNC machines, would predominantly be available for engineering students who have a background in utilizing and designing for this kind of equipment. But because, as I said earlier, the garage is extracurricular, quite a lot of our students, and in fact, some of the most emphatic and heavy users of this space, specifically the makerspace resources, are students who have no prior experience with it. That's something that I'm very proud to foster here. Is this space, just like the IRL, is equally accessible to a four-year engineering student as it is to a journalism student who hasn't seen a 3D printer before. So that kind of engagement that covers the whole wide range of the student body here is something that's definitely very familiar from my time at the IRL. Let's see, some differences would be that the IRL has the benefit of being open and available for any student, faculty, or alumni on campus for any purpose, and they have the square footage to support that. I know that my time at the IRL saw engagement from hundreds of students throughout the course of the year. The makerspace here is around 2,000 square feet, and that encompasses the workshop space as well as the VR area and photo and video production studio. So definitely quite a bit smaller in terms of square footage than what the IRL had to work with. And because of that, the scope of our space is definitely much more focused on student entrepreneurship. So students are welcome to come and explore and make use of the space, but the general focus is to provide them help with developing, for instance, physical prototypes for products they hope to develop, developing merchandising in the form of embroidered, t-shirts and hats and other types of branded merchandise to help support their team and their business, access to media printing services that allow them to work on things like stickers and handouts and business cards, and access to the camera equipment and video production studio for the purposes of developing professional headshots, product demos and testimonials, filming commercials, all that kind of stuff. So I would say that it's contrasted to the IRL in that the IRL was a blank slate that any student could come in to fill with whatever creative aspect they wanted to work on, whereas the garage is definitely much more focused on student entrepreneurship.
Right. Yeah. And I imagine there are a lot of advantages to that and those constraints when it comes to giving students kind of the pathway towards taking a concept that they want to bring into into the real world, and really scaling it. I think that the labs at DePaul, I can't speak to them now, but at least when we were there, were I mean, certainly a student could have taken a product idea that they had and scaled it, but it certainly didn't. The spaces themselves didn't have the capacity to guide students through that process, because they were more intended for earlier in the creative process than later on down the line. So there have to be a lot of advantages to that, I assume. I wonder what kinds of, I've got a question in here about initial challenges, but I don't think initial challenges are quite appropriate for where you're at with the garage. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just challenges in general that you face running your corner of the garage. Students coming in, like you said, with a wide array of backgrounds and things like that. What challenges do you see with working with them, or onboarding them, or helping them through the process, and how do you address those challenges?
Absolutely, yeah. So let's see. For the past 2.5 years now, I've been at the garage since December of 2021. Or was that 20? No, yeah, 2021. I've been, in charge of the makerspace, and that, as I said, encompasses the prototyping lab and the video production studio. I inherited this space in its nearly complete state from my predecessor, who did a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of outlining the overall layout of the space and equipping it with some of the heavier and larger pieces of equipment. So during the past 2 years, it's been my work has entailed mostly refinement and evolution of the current setup. So that means, seeing how students are currently engaging with the resources, what gets most heavily used, what is being, you know, ignored, or what is, no longer required by the student population, and allowing that to inform things like onboarding new equipment, reorganizing the space to, prioritize these forms of engagement that I feel are more important and overall more deserving of the square footage that we have here, and uh, also, kind of taking a look forward and seeing how, a new piece of equipment or technology might, be utilized by students. So I'd say, I guess the biggest challenge that I'm facing currently is, where that new frontier exists, where, always staying up to date on new types of technologies that can, work in a makerspace like this. For instance, the embroidery machine, which was definitely a new and big addition to this space about, let's see, 8 or 9 months into my time here. So researching these types of equipment, deciding beforehand in the form of, you know, sending out polls to our most dedicated students about how interested they may be in having access to something like an industrial scale embroidery machine, and ultimately making that decision on, because it's a big ticket item, it's a large purchase, and understanding that, with that comes the risk that you can spend thousands of dollars on something, but, working on the assumption that students will actively engage in that resource. And, that's kind of the main issue. I mean, the main struggle of managing a space like this is trying to know as much beforehand about how students will engage with the resources here, so that when you buy a big ticket item like that, you know that it's going to be a worthwhile purchase, and that you can see the gains in terms of student engagement there.
Yeah, I'll give you a plug. I have no interest. I have no vested interest in promoting this. I just this is when it comes to what I'm looking forward to right now. I've been playing with technology called Meshtastic. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
Mm.
it's a somewhat local area mesh network that you can pass data through using like
Yeah,
node-based
I
systems.
have heard of this. Does this use is LoRa?
That's right.
That's
Yeah,
one
it
of.
uses LoRa on the 915 megahertz band, and you can have up to 70 people in any one channel, is what they call them on it. and you can pass data through nodes to get to other nodes. It's actually pretty fun. I think it's probably very early and pretty geeky right now, but that's where a lot
Hmm.
of that stuff usually starts, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Somewhat related to that is there's a student startup that just joined the Tinkerer program here that's
Mhm.
working to develop a low energy usage, like Bluetooth and kind of radio frequency enabled tracking bracelet. It's designed for parents to keep track of their kids in
Yep.
places like amusement parks
Yep.
or kind of these dedicated spaces. And we were discussing the possibility of them researching Meshtastic and LoRa to
Yep.
develop in a space like that.
Yeah, that'd be a perfect use of the technology, actually. So
Hmm.
you mentioned what's getting used and what isn't, and also things that you're looking forward to. We had some offline discussions about at least one thing that you are really enjoying right now, and I won't give that away if you know what I'm talking about. What's you know what I'm really interested in? What isn't getting used, and why do you think that is? And then tell me where you think what are you looking forward to?
That's a really great question. I think, yeah, see the yeah, because like nothing ever works exactly as you plan it to, and you can
Right.
you know you can build it, but the students won't come if there's no incentive for them to do so. So I think I'd say one of the avenues of my exploration in this makerspace that I still think there's hope for it, but it will require some more augmentation and more dedicated programming to promote it. Is I noticed that a lot of students were working on physical prototypes of objects that would ultimately be injection molded on a large scale when they were ready
Mhm.
to reach that level of manufacturing. So let's see, the previous summer I onboarded a small scale injection molding machine. So
Oh,
basically a just a small 8 cubic inch shot size injection molding with it's got a big wheel that you
yeah.
spin to press down the hot plastic into a mold. And you know I'd say mainly due to a failure in understanding all that goes into injection molding in terms of the designing of the molds, the all of the specific manufacturing guidelines that go into it, determining your draft angles and your overall volume, and helping to having to reduce the internal volume of certain parts to avoid the expansion or contraction of plastic, and the actual fabrication of these molds. The makerspace has not yet met the need of that type of development in order to make the acquisition of an injection molder useful. I think the most activity it's gotten thus far is a student who already had a small aluminum injection mold made, was able to bring it in and make a small batch of parts using that existing mold. But when it comes to tooling and developing that tooling, we were hoping to initially work with our resin 3D printing, because I had seen many articles discussing the fact that resin 3D printing, especially using rigid 10K resin from Formlabs, was a viable solution, at least in the short term, for developing prototype injection molds. After many attempts to make that work, we found that it was definitely not as good as a solid piece of metal that's being developed there. So
Yeah.
to combat this and to help promote engagement in all aspects of this space, because I know that if we can overcome those hurdles of developing tooling for this kind of machine, it can be more heavily utilized. So we've onboarded now a Carvera CNC machine
Okay.
that is capable of machining metal, and we've bought a few blocks of aluminum along with that. So I'm hoping to,
Okay.
over the summer, or by shepherding a particular student group that's working in hardware, towards this kind of technology, and kind of crowdsource that research onto
Yeah.
the students who would most actively be using it. I'm hoping to develop a framework that will allow them to use our injection molder.
Right. Okay. Wow. Yeah. It's often the things that are the further on down the line in the production process that are the hardest to get to onboard, particularly undergrad students on. because of the amount of mental leaps that you need to take from initial conception all the way into making your own mold. I
Absolutely.
wonder, I want to go back to when we were discussing some of the differences between the idea realization lab and a space like the garage, because there is a balance that you have to strike between creative freedom and commercial objectives, meaning that when you are trying to commercialize something, you often need to make creative compromises. You need to make creative, you have to exist in that tension a little bit more. And I was wondering how you encourage, if at all, students to kind of move into that commercialization process and and like from the creative process to the commercialization process.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, the core idea of the garage is to provide this safety net, as it were, to you know help students who wouldn't otherwise feel confident in taking a creative risk in developing a business idea of theirs, and providing them with free and ample resources, and in many cases access to undiluted funding to help promote that business idea. So, with regards to the early phase stuff, when students come in with a pie in the sky idea for something they want to develop, the main goal of the garage is to make it so that they can take those risks, start developing a project, and not have to worry so much about the commercialization aspect of it. I think one of our key strategic approaches of the garage, and something that you'll hear me and my colleagues repeat often, is that our goal is to, you know, building students before companies. We want to, our main goal here is to encourage students to take those entrepreneurship risks, take those
Mm.
big leaps that they wouldn't otherwise feel confident to do so if it was their own capital or somebody else's direct capital on the line.
Right.
And so, yeah, first and foremost, it's developing those creative tendencies, those strategies in students. And we found that that's often been most beneficial to students, even if their current startup, the current venture they're working on in the garage, doesn't pan out. In fact, about 90% of student startups that begin in this space don't continue past the graduation of all students involved. But even with that metric in mind, the actual you know success obtained by our students can be quantified in a lot of different ways. Those that want to continue in entrepreneurship can jump into their next idea, their next business venture, with a much more grounded idea of
Mm.
what actually goes into creating a startup, and it helps them to avoid a lot of the pitfalls that first time founders will fall into.
Right.
So on that side, we definitely encourage on more creative freedom rather than commercial objectives here at the garage.
Right.
But for those student teams that are, barreling towards commercial success, we often provide them with resources such as office hours, where they can talk with outside experts in the community to provide specific legal advice to, whatever stage in the business they're on. On the development side, the garage harbors a direct connection with MHub, which is a
Mhm.
manufacturing space here in Chicago. And I've had it many times where students who are working on prototyping in this space, once they're actually ready to start commercializing it, for instance, they've gone through all of their prototyping and testing using our 3D printers here in the space, and they're ready to move on to large scale injection molding, helping shepherd them towards more industrial outlets like MHub to really work on to allow uh, that space to play to its strengths, which is the commercialization and large scale production of
Hard,
goods.
yeah, hard tech is what they call
Mm-hmm.
it, right? I I want to go back to, you mentioned, that it's more about students learning process and you give them resources so that they're taking it doesn't feel like as much of a risk because it's not their own resources, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if, I knowing that the garage, you also, I think, if I'm correct, and my knowledge is up to date, there is kind of like a process where it's like a beginning, middle, end. So you go through one cohort, and that's like your beginning cohort, and you become familiarized with the entrepreneurial process. And then some students graduate from that cohort into another, and so on. And I'm wondering, at any point in that process, what is like what's a story that you can remember, or a project that you can think of that speaks to the success that you're looking for with the space? And what I also, I guess, how do you, if you know, measure success? Like, what are the key performance indicators that say that the program is working?
Absolutely, yeah. So to start on the first part of that, regarding a specific student story that I think perfectly exemplifies the trajectory that we hope that students take through the garage. First off, there is no direct trajectory. Students can move fluidly between any of our programs, and we have resources that can meet them at any level in their entrepreneurship journey, whether they're just getting started on an idea or they don't even have an idea yet and they're looking for inspiration, all the way on to, these students are, have been working on this project for years, either in our programs or before even coming here, and they're looking to get to the next stage of development. You know, whether that's a mass manufacturing run, or in some cases even getting acquired.
Mm.
The garage is meant to, we have programs to meet them at all levels, and generally the framework is that we have at the very beginning, we think of our programs like a funnel, that we have the wide opening that is meant to capture as many students as possible, from a wide range of backgrounds and entrepreneurial experience. And that funnel steadily narrows down towards our much more dedicated programs that offer that specific guidance and feedback for students who are further along in their entrepreneurship journey. So that opening of the funnel is called the Tinkerer program, and it's named as such because students who are just tinkering with an idea, whether it's, like I said, whether it's in the early stages or even before the earliest stages of just developing an idea for what they want to accomplish. And that moves down towards the residency program. The residency program is for student teams that are beyond the idea stage. They've decided exactly what they want to accomplish as a business, and they're looking to engage much more heavily with the resources of the garage to make that a reality. The Tinkerer program is open to any student, and there is no application. It is simply just a sign up, and that's meant to lower the barrier to entry to nothing. If a student is interested at all in the garage, they can sign up for that program and immediately begin accessing the resources that we have made available to them. And the ideal circumstance is where a student will join the Tinkerer program and kind of develop the loose framework for the idea they hope to accomplish. And with that, they can apply and then be accepted to the residency program, where they're given 24/7 access to the space and a lot of other dedicated resources like a direct mentor and the opportunity to see guest speaker events on a weekly basis to help support their entrepreneurship journey. And the residency program is designed to shepherd them through all levels of their development, from still in the early stages to all the way on to graduating out of the space, moving on to mass manufacturing or getting acquired. I think a great example of a student team that has gone through that exact trajectory and is now have now just graduated out of the garage is SteadyScript. So SteadyScript started about 2.5 years ago by two students who had joined the Tinkerer program because they wanted to see if their fledgling idea for a business had legs and could be supported by the garage's programs. This was started by Izzy Mukatoff and Alexis Chan, who Izzy, her grandfather had Parkinson's, and which limited their tradition of handwritten letters back and forth to each other. So that emotional need to find a way to allow her grandfather to continue writing was the impetus for developing this device, which is a pen which uses a magnet at the tip of the pen that stabilizes it against a magnetic backed writing surface. At the core, a very simple idea, but they saw a need for it from Izzy herself, as well as people that she spoke to who were in similar situations. And they joined up with the Garage and the Tinkerer program, made themselves known to the staff here, and started talking to me in the makerspace about the possibility of 3D printing an initial prototype. Helping them out with that allowed them to kind of develop a small, a light framework for what they would hope to accomplish as a business. And that allowed them to join our summer jumpstart program, which is essentially designed to be a ramp up into residency. So students can spend full time here over the summer. They're paid a stipend to allow them to work here on their business full time. And that culminates in a pitch competition at the end of the summer that provides undiluted funding to a number of student winners. And it's just a great way to kind of jumpstart students into the next year of development as part of the residency program. So both Izzy and Alexis excelled through the Jumpstart program. They ended up winning our summer Jumpstart competition and won $5,000 to start developing and start hiring interns to work on this project full time. And I will work on this project here at the Garage as the residency program. They were still full-time students. But then from that point forward, they joined the residency program. They were some of the most heavy users of this space when it comes to developing 3D printed prototypes using our makerspace, utilizing our camera equipment to bring in members of the Parkinson's community and film them using the device, and helping to grow that business, grow the community that they've developed around it. And finally, culminating now with them winning second place in our VentureCat competition. VentureCat is a yearly pitch competition held at Northwestern for any Northwestern students who are working on businesses. And SteadyScript won the second place prize, which was $50,000, which allowed them to immediately, instead of a few months from now, pull the trigger on their manufacturing push, which is now allowing them to get 5,000 injection molded units of their 3D printed prototype developed and shipped to customers who are on their wait list. So I think that SteadyScript is a great example of the perfect execution of our goals as the Garage, to take a student team who is from the very get-go just has a great idea and has the will to pursue it, and at every step in the way giving them that extra push, that extra step up to allow them to smoothly ramp up into mass scale production and hopefully commercial success.
So I want to kind of touch on that real quick. That's a physical product. You'd mentioned earlier on, a lot of the products that students are working on in the space are digital as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so folks might think that, if you're making a physical product, a physical space is necessary perhaps, but if you're making a digital one, do you really need to have a center? Do you really need to have a place? And, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, the dynamics within the center. Is a space important, like an actual place important for an innovation program? And what role does it play, the actual place itself in the broader community? Because of course you have other programming that's entirely non-physical, right? The funding that you provide, the mentorship, all of those things could probably be done, I don't know, let's say over Zoom for argument's sake.
Mm-hmm.
Although that already sounds terrible to me, but they could, I suppose. So what's the role of the center in the broader community? And just speak a little bit to that on that to me.
Of course, yeah. I'll start right off by saying that I believe, having worked here for 2.5 years and seeing the incredible gains that students have made in their development of their businesses and products, as well as their professional relationships with their peers, as well as outside members of the community, I think that a physical space is absolutely necessary, regardless of the type or the scope of your business venture. Obviously, as you said, physical products requiring a physical manufacturing space, that just makes sense. And digital goods, you can technically do it over Zoom, but I think the perfect example of what is lost in that type of programming can be seen in how the Garage operated through COVID. I think that gives us a wonderful case study on why the garage requires a physical space to harbor this community of engagement. So I joined this team in December of 2021, so it was kind of on the slow climb out of the COVID slump. So I can only speak anecdotally about the experience that my coworkers who had been here longer than I had during that time. But I think one thing we pride ourselves at here at the garage, and it sounds cliched, but it's true, is the community we grow is one of the most valuable resources that a student can have here in a space. I think that developing those connections with their peers in a space like this is something that can't be recreated in purely a digital or virtual sense. You can provide someone with the funding, you can provide someone with a mentor and career development skills, all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, when you're a student here in the residency area and you see other students here with you every day working on different projects, you start to become more engaged with the broader community of entrepreneurship on campus. The director of this space, Mike, often says that the goal of the garage is to manufacture serendipity. And
Mm.
I think that's a perfect way to describe that, a lot of students, teams that we've seen here have either been completely formed or uh, wholly changed by a serendipitous conversation between two students working on different things here in the space.
Right.
That type of cross collaboration and communication is something that only a physical space can have,
Right.
and something that we strive to promote here in the space, something that we've worked hard to kind of reestablish after the slum of COVID has, kind of dropped all of that off. The garage went fully remote for, I think, almost a year.
Mm.
And through that, we were able to keep our more dedicated students engaged with, weekly Zoom meetings and things like that. But in terms of new student engagement and
Mm.
students meeting each other and finding out that they have a similar idea on how to solve a certain problem and working on that together, that type of serendipity almost completely dropped out.
Yeah, I think that at DePaul, we had a similar experience, right? I think we were fortunate in that we had some centralizing projects that we had been working on. And so that kept, some of the more core community and employees engaged. But there's, certainly something to be said for the random atomized collisions that can happen in real space. And and I wonder, what is over your past 2.5 years there. One of the things that when we started the labs at DePaul that we focused on, this is going to sound silly at first, is that everything's on wheels. And everything was on wheels because that community that makes up that physical space, it changes over time as well, and the space needs to evolve to meet their needs. And that was like a strategy that we implemented. I wonder what kind of strategies. It doesn't have to be wheels, right? It doesn't have to be casters. but what other kinds of strategies do you employ to sustain that community that you're talking about in that space?
Yeah, exactly. I think we're definitely on the same page there, and that probably speaks to how formative my experience at the IRL was towards adding my experience to this place. But I literally have written here is be ready to change to meet student needs. I
Right.
think part of what makes the garage so successful over the many years that it's been in operation is that we have rarely ever stuck to something simply because that's what we've been doing for a little while. We're always ready to completely upend what we've been doing for the past several years if we feel like that can provide a better experience for students. This space was developed in 2015. We had it specced out to be a collaborative space that students could come in and study for classes in the common area or work in dedicated meeting rooms near the back for their residency teams. And we had 2 classrooms here as well that allowed for faculty to reserve time and teach their own classes here in our classroom. Great way to promote student engagement and having them come to the space for class and stay for all of the great entrepreneurship resources. But to that point, the way the garage is currently being utilized on a day-to-day basis is probably very different than how it was originally designed. First and foremost is we no longer have two classrooms, we have one classroom. One of the classrooms was about 2 or 3 years into the garage's lifetime, transitioned and changed into the makerspace. When the space initially began, there was no makerspace, there was no prototyping lab, there was no video production program, and because of that, there were no resources like 3D printing, like sticker production, like merchandising and embroidery, and I think and also no resources like camera equipment to help students promote and develop content. But we found out the garage staff saw early on that students were really gearing to try to find this type of resource on campus. So we decided that removing one of our classrooms and replacing it with a fully fledged makerspace was the right move. And that that type of ethos, that idea that just because we had just because we built it as a classroom doesn't mean it needs to stay that way, has kind of helped the garage stay on its feet, as it were, and always meet the need for students. Somewhat related too is that all of the furniture in the garage is designed to be lightweight and movable, and it moves often. We have obviously the classroom. One of the reasons it's very attractive to faculty who wish to conduct class here is that nothing is set in stone. They can have bench seating if they want to. They can do table in the round for a class discussion. They can move all the tables and chairs off to the side and have a completely open space. And we've had that, we've seen that that's friendly to a variety of classes that come here, from, acting classes who just want a big open space to play around in, to drone building classes, because we were the only place on campus that was happy with them flying drones inside the building. So always being able to change and meet the need for students is very important to the garage.
What are you using for sticker production? Selfish question. I need to support this.
Absolutely, yeah. So right now it's a bit of a two-step process. I had researched looking into like dedicated sticker printers that could do high quality vinyl production, and that may be something we onboard in the future. But essentially now we utilize a Cricut machine.
Okay, so you're printing and then doing a kiss cut.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
But I think the one thing that's helped us out with that is finding the right type of paper to print on, and a high quality printer to print with. So we have nice kind of glossy, semi-waterproof paper that we can easily print out student graphics and designs and cut them out right away.
Right. Okay. I thought maybe you'd found some a magic thing that made the sticker process easier. It sounds like you are running into the same thing. I did find total sidetrack. Mm-hmm. Somewhat recently, a tool that makes the silk screening process a little bit easier. I don't know if you've run into X Tool, but they have
the laser silk screen.
Yeah. So it removes the photo emulsive process, which maybe makes it a little bit less dirty, and certainly there are drawbacks, but if you're short on space or you're short on a couple other resources and you've got a laser cutter around, that seems to be the trick.
Mm-hmm. I think and we might loop back to this later on the question about what I would do if starting from scratch in a space like this, but one of the limiting factors of the makerspace here is its lack of plumbing and its lack of air ventilation.
Right.
So a lot of times students will come in asking, like, do we have screen printing? And it's, unfortunately, I can't really have anything that's wet in the shop, like paint or inks, because we don't have a sink or plumbing to help support cleaning that. But yeah, I have seen the X Tool in their development of silk screen stuff. I think if somehow later on down the line we can figure out how to get a plumbing system into this space, that'd be a great way to add to the merchandising capabilities. Right now, at least, we have embroidery, we have vinyl heat transfer, and we have sublimation printing.
Right. Sublimation, also a nice, easy way to get around some of those constraints.
Exactly. That's why I chose sublimation. However, the caveat of working only with polyester is kind of limiting sometimes when students bring in cotton shirts and stuff that they want to put their logos on.
Right. So I'm gonna shift gears kind of here. Really not shifting gears too much though. And I want to talk about people who are establishing centers like yours, in academic institutions. And I guess we could couch this within the context of that's what I'm doing here at Washington and Lee. By the way, my predecessor had moved to a different institution for 2.5 years, and so before I came in, and so my position was unfilled for almost 3 years, and that gave me kind of like a blank slate. And we're currently in the process of, establishing, reestablishing, in some instances, the center ourselves. So I guess you can consider this advice to anyone or advice to me even on how what are best practices, what are models that they might look to, whether it's models that you follow internally or models from other external places as well. What would you tell folks who are getting started in this space?
Yeah, I think, just thinking about some of the ways that we feel limited in the garage is, I'd say, the most obvious thing, and probably some of the most difficult aspect to account for when developing space from scratch is square footage. I mean, a creative space like this will naturally, just expand to fill all the space that you have available for it. So,
Right.
however much square footage you think is required for a space, you'll always, in a few years' time, be wanting more.
Yeah.
So, I think, developing a space so that you're not locked into a specific use for a specific section of the space. Because a lot of times, that need for more space can come obviously from expansion, but that's not always possible. I think, kind of metabolism is a more worthwhile approach, knowing that, in your set square footage in your environment, there are going to be certain things that require more space than you originally allotted for them. And that can come at the expense of spaces that maybe are taking up a little too much space.
Yeah.
And, keeping that in mind and developing kind of an open floor plan so that you can expand certain areas when needed and contract other areas when needed. I think that can help in the long run to promote the longevity of a space like this.
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing that I miss, and of course this goes to how much what can take up a lot of space in a center like these that we're talking about is I miss having a substantial wood shop.
I was going to
And
say the exact same thing.
yeah, I mean, there's so much that you don't realize that you're at the whims of Amazon and Walmart and every other place until you are incapable of reducing a piece of wood down to what you need it to be reduced down to so that you could build
Mm-hmm.
furniture, so that you can build anything really. That's the kind of technology. It sounds so silly, right? Like the technology I miss is a wood shop and a sewing machine. That's the stuff that you need if you're really going to encourage that kind of self sufficiency that a space can have.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose this is an interesting, maybe kind of segue. Although I think when people talk about technology, they think of not table saws, but but maybe if you could talk a little bit, Jake, about what are some of the essential resources, technologies that support the garage, and what kind of technology has changed or affected the way you operate. I'm thinking of, I mean, with your game background, VR, right, is has got to be in there somewhere, but other things as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. I think one of the things about the garage and specifically my role here that makes it feel every day like a dream that I get to actually come here and do this is that, part of my job here is just to stay up to date on all, all types of technology that may or may not be used for entrepreneurship in our space. So that means, of course, onboarding new makerspace equipment like new and more capable CNC machines and 3D printers, which I'm sure I'll loop back to
Yeah.
in the next little segment here. But also, as you talked about, VR, and by extension, there lots of other more unique pieces of technology that we make available here for students to provide. I guess it's for certain students, it's inspiration and the opportunity for development on these platforms. But for the vast majority of other students, it's, I would say, that the garage's acquisition of new and exciting technology, like, for instance, the Apple Vision Pro or some new VR stuff. We had researched getting the that humane AI pin.
Yeah.
Ultimately, decided against it. I think for good reason. But
Yeah.
the 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 impetus for that, the inspiration for that, is for the garage at least to provide that concrete access to new technology for students, but also
Right.
to cement ourselves in the consciousness of the student body as the place where the cool stuff is. I mean,
Right.
there's that's such a nebulous term, but it's something that if you can find a way to maintain that and develop that within the consciousness of the students who are going to be utilizing the space, that's something
Right.
that can pay back itself many times over. I mean,
Right.
the so many times there's students who will come into the space, you know, urged on by a friend of theirs and saying, like, hey, I've heard that this space has some really cool technology and equipment. I would love to see if I can, develop my app for Vision Pro, or if I can,
Right.
utilize a 3D printer to mass produce this little eclectic thing that I've been developing, and I think there might be a market for. And
Right.
so sometimes, the Apple Vision Pro, I think, is a perfect example of this. It's a distillation of, you know, onboarding technology for many purposes. The actual hardware itself, I don't know if you've had a chance to try it before, but
I have. I'm waiting for version 2 to come out if it ever comes out.
I think that's my recommendation as well to anybody who tries it out here and is thinking about getting it, because it is very much a version 1 hardware. It does a lot of things really well, but is limited in a lot of ways. And you'd think that on its face, they cost about $3,500 each, which is a pretty big ticket item here. And we've seen a few students actively engage with it in terms of development, where they've ported their app that they've been working on into Vision Pro, either for just the sheer novelty of it or because they want to engage with the new technology in some kind of
Right.
way. But even just looking at those direct uses of the technology, in my opinion, I don't think it's fully recouped its cost. But in terms of engagement in the space, bringing people in because they hear we have some cool stuff, and then while they're here,
Right.
finding inspiration and access to other materials and equipment as a promotional tool, that kind of thing is great. And
Yeah.
that's kind of the balance that we have to tread here. That I have to tread as the technology manager here, is that a lot of stuff is just no brainer. Like, of course, I'm going to upgrade the 3D printers, as new technology becomes available, just because that's heavily used. We know it's going to get engagement, that kind of stuff. But sometimes you just have to take big swings and decide, like, hey, having a Vision Pro here, having an injection molder here, regardless of whether they are actively being utilized, which I hope they are and will be in some way in the future. It's, you kind of got to treat these kinds of technology resources as promotional items as much as they are active resources.
Yeah. So I think this is probably so two things because
Mm-hmm.
I have been on the fence about getting a Vision Pro or a couple. One thing that I'm hesitant about, and I love to hear this, is another side kind of bar here.
Mm-hmm.
I would be incredibly hesitant to put a thing on my face that other people are also wearing in a shared community space because it seems like it might be dirty. That's number one. I wonder how you deal with that. Number two, I got to give you a second to talk about the bamboo printers because I know that that's what you're champing at the bit to do.
Absolutely, yeah. So to touch on the first bit about cleanliness in an environment that has wearable equipment, I
Yeah.
think I think first and foremost, kind of understanding where to put your effort, as it were, because you can obviously, you know, fully sanitize the headset between every use and all that kind of stuff. But sometimes, and in my opinion, I think the way that the Vision Pro is utilized in in a lot of ways, it's the way that Apple has kind of put walls up on the way the Vision Pro can be utilized. I'd say that it definitely doesn't get it's not as much of a cleanliness crisis as, for instance, the Valve Index is, just because the way you're engaging with it is you're seated and it's obviously touching your face, but you're mainly just there, you know, consuming content, reaching out, interacting with stuff. Whereas with more dedicated and gaming focused VR headsets, you're moving around, you're sweating, there's that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. But I think with both sides of that spectrum, there basically it's just generally two things: is if somebody's going to spend prolonged use in there, we have disposable covers that are available, basically like they they're basically like a sticker that sticks to the facial interface on the
Oh,
headset, and that way that's what's making contact with your head. And then when the headset's off, you can just peel that off and throw it away. The And then that mixed with technically it says that the fabric interfaces on these types of devices are machine washable. I haven't taken them up on that yet, but what we have done is use disinfecting wipes, or an
yeah.
ample use of isopropyl alcohol or something, and just to clean out those headset face cushions, and then just let them dry.
So the second thing I mentioned, the bamboo printers,
Mm-hmm.
BAMBU. I first learned
BAMBU,
about
yeah.
them from you. Do you want to tell folks what they are?
Absolutely, yeah. So
Huh.
I guess to provide some background for
Oh,
anybody who hasn't been,
and tell me why I should get one of those instead of like a Prusa MK4, let's say, for instance.
I can talk at length about that. And not to say that Prusa is you know not a worthwhile investment. I absolutely have nothing but the highest respect for Prusa and the openness that they're treating their community with, and all that. But so rewinding all the way back, for anybody who hasn't been working with 3D printers, since the beginning, and I haven't. I've been working with 3D printers since 2016. That was the very first time I saw or even engaged with a 3D printer was at DePaul's ID Realization Lab.
Hmm.
I saw it my freshman year. The technology has been, in my eyes, about the same in terms of the general idea of how FDM 3D printers work, just moving around a tool head on a gantry and placing plastic layer by layer to build your part up. And there have been incremental, small improvements in terms of reliability and maybe marginal improvements in speed. However, those are just on the order of like, 5 or 10% faster,
Right.
just through the generations. And what's always been tough is the user experience of it. The 3D printers have always been, and I think will always be, a tinkerer's machine. It's something that you know at the more you engage with it, the more you have a deep understanding of how the machine works, the more you can appreciate and get out of it. But I think that Bamboo Labs, with their new set of machines, has fundamentally changed the way a 3D printer can be seen and interacted with by somebody at any level of technical experience. And the way it does that is by bringing an incredible amount of you know tinkerer level, you know an incredible amount of specific things that 3D printers have had on the hobbyist level for a while, and bringing it to a commercial aspect, and
Right.
also wrapping all of that in a user experience that is pretty incredible to use, having seen where it's come from. So all that beating around the bush to get to it is that the bamboo printers are fast. They are some of the fastest consumer 3D printer machines I've ever seen. And not only are they fast, they're reliable, they're repeatable, and they produce some of the highest part quality of any FDM 3D printer I've personally witnessed. And all of that with the smallest amount of maintenance and calibration and upkeep required.
Okay. Yeah.
And the way that they do that is by bringing a lot of really cool tech like resonance compensation. I don't know if you've
Hmm.
seen
Yep.
Clipper, is it called, is the kind of hobbyist version of it.
Yep.
and that allows the machine to move so incredibly fast while accounting
Yep.
for the vibrations the machine itself makes. And that's one part of it. But even if these printers didn't print as fast as they did, I think the user interface, for me, the having these types of machines in a space populated primarily by students who don't have, a years long experience with 3D printers, that's where the noticeable gains and improvements in engagement can come from. And this is where it'll come back to Prusa. Prusa's exceptional. They're a wonderful company. They make a really outstanding product, and they promote a community of people who are really interested in 3D printing and help support that. If you're making a 3D printer available to somebody who just wants to walk up to it and print something, the Bamboo experience is far greater. They have each of the printers comes with its own built-in camera that allows you to connect to it remotely to send parts without having to fiddle with a thumb drive or SD card. There's a advanced queuing system so that you can, queue up parts one after the other. You can monitor prints remotely, and you can easily see as I'm managing the space, I can walk over and just look on the screen of the printer, and it'll show me exactly what's printing, and with a little image of that 3D model there, and that just makes it so much better in a management standpoint than a Prusa, which is as soon as the part begins printing, all at that point is how much time it has left.
Right.
You don't have that wealth of information about what this part is, what the intended design is, so that you can evaluate what it might, whether it might be failing or not. And then so many other myriad things that, as far as I'm aware, only Bamboo does. One of the things that just blew my mind the other day, and you might love this too, is
Yeah.
imagine you're printing 4 parts all together on the build platform,
Yeah.
and one of those parts, breaks off from its foundations. It starts making spaghetti.
Right.
What do you do with a Prusa at that point? You have to evaluate, well, are these 3 other parts far enough along that I can just let it keep going, and knowing that it's just going to produce nothing but spaghetti that's going to, mess
Right.
up everything? Or do I stop it and start over? With Bamboo, I can go to that touchscreen and look at a top-down view of the build platform, and I can click that object has failed. Stop printing that object, and it
Oh,
will
wow.
actively cut that object out of each layer G code and just focus on the 3 that are currently working.
Yeah.
Not to say that failures are common on this thing, because the calibration that this thing goes through is incredible. It has a LiDAR sensor
Yeah.
right on the head of the printer. Bed adhesion has been just excellent across the board, even on the smallest, most difficult parts. So
Okay.
I think
All right.
what Bamboo does is they produce a remarkably efficient product that, they're not as open to, they're not open source like Prusa is. So you're not going to be able to, you know,
Yeah.
uh, you're not going to be able to print your own replacement parts if you ever need them for this kind of thing. You're not going to have that kind of community. But for what it is a uh, very reliable and infinitely better first time printers experience
Right.
than a Prusa would be.
I will note that whether we're talking about X Tool or Bamboo or anything else in between, neither of us, or at least to my knowledge, Jake, are getting paid to endorse
Nope.
any of these products. These are solely reviews based on our own opinions. So nobody
And that should
worry.
show anybody who's listening our enthusiasm with this type
That's
of
right.
ecosystem technology is self-evident and self-sustaining. It doesn't,
That's
if
right.
if a tool or a company is worth mentioning, it's something that is, has proven itself to be worth mentioning.
That's right. So switching gears, maybe one last time here. We're kind of getting to the closing.
Mm-hmm.
Jake, what are some of the most valuable lessons that you've learned as you've been working in the innovation center in the garage? And I guess this is kind of so that's one part question, uh, things you've learned, and then I'm wondering if you could speak to challenges and future trends. So kind of combining a couple questions here, challenges and future trends that you anticipate will impact innovation centers going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the biggest things that I've learned since starting at this role here is, and this is kind of when taking into account the many kind of turns that my career has taken since graduating from DePaul.
Mm.
So I started my professional development at the IRL, working in a creative space that allowed me to take my curiosity and enthusiasm with technology and help other students and other creative people to understand how to use this technology and how to incorporate it into their own workflows.
Mm.
That was something that I definitely took for granted during my time at DePaul, because that was my first real experience with that kind of thing in a working environment.
Mm-hmm.
After leaving DePaul, I continued working with Jay to create COVID face shields in the early days of the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic, which led to some contract 3D printing work with other entrepreneurial spaces like 1871, where I
Mm-hmm.
got to do a similar thing, which was help people utilize certain technologies for their creative endeavors. And then I made the jump to industry. I worked at a industrial 3D printing startup called Fast Radius, and worked my way up to the head of the quality team there, where my responsibilities were, on its face, somewhat similar. Was making technology available to other people, but what was lost there was that specific connection with the people utilizing the technology. This was a manufacturing space through and through, so there was no back and forth with a client about, you know, I had no recourse to say, like, hey, this part you've sent to us to 3D print is, if you change this little aspect of the design, it would work so much better, and be able to pass our quality inspection with much higher degree. We were so heavily siloed there that it was, all I would get was just the engineering drawings from our client and
Right.
interpret it as such, and make my quality assessment. There was no. So I feel like that was my first taste of what I felt like I was missing and didn't know that I had missed, was a direct connection with the people I am providing the services to. And so when Jay reached out with this wonderful opportunity at the garage, looking for somebody doing exactly that, I am every day happy that I jumped on that and made it my predominant focus here, because seeing students in this space who are bursting with creativity and looking for a way to make that a reality, that's something that is fundamentally the most important thing for me at this job, is making this technology available for students who wouldn't otherwise have access to it, and providing the framework to allow them to succeed on their designs. That's something that I learned early on, and that's something that, working in a entrepreneurship space, there's always the question of, like, well, what am I working on? What's my next big product that's going to change the world? And my answer to that is, I found that my engagement with this space, uh, the most important thing for me is less, giving me the opportunity to, you know, capture that lightning in the bottle and, make $1 billion on it. It's more creating an environment that allows so many other people to explore their creative aspects of their ideas and make that a reality. So my biggest learning is that, you know, much more important than going at going at it by myself and, developing the next world changing device or gizmo or gadget, is creating an environment or having a role that allows me to, be a helpful guiding force in a lot of other creative engagement.
That's awesome, Jake. It's been really enjoyable for me to watch you kind of grow professionally into your roles. And I gotta say, you've got to be proud of yourself. I certainly am proud of the things that you've been doing, and I can only see more wonderful things to come. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to briefly talk about? Is there anything that you wanted to plug that you're working on? This is your time.
Let's see. I think this can kind of help to kind of put a nice little bow on everything. Is, where I expect to see, the future of
Yeah.
the garage go, and, at
Yeah.
large, what kind of trends are that I see on the horizon for innovation centers,
Yeah.
across the nation. And I think, firstly, my time here at the garage is, 2.5 years so far, and I feel like I'm just getting started in terms of,
Mm.
really digging in deep here and making this the best possible resource for student entrepreneurs on campus.
Mm.
I think, I hope that I'm going to have the opportunity to continue to grow and expand the capability of this space, whether that's by, you know, expanding our square footage into the rest of the building that we currently occupy, or, with any luck, being granted the opportunity to have a building of our own or a new space that is larger or better equipped for this kind of entrepreneurship sometime later on down the line. But I'm really excited for everything that's on the horizon for the garage, and I can't wait to go there with my team and help meet that. As far as, trends that I feel like are going to impact the future of innovation centers, I think that, as student entrepreneurship is generally been over the past several years tending further and further towards digital goods and services. Like
Right.
a great example of that is our first place winner of VentureCat this year, TurboLearn AI, is not only a digital tool, but one utilizing AI and large language models specifically. I think that, no matter how this whole, AI thing goes, whether it's going to just continue to grow and grow and expand, whether it's going to plateau and, you know, find its, rut, as it were, what it's useful at, what it's not useful at, or whether it's going to, backpedal and diminish in future years based on, consumer preference. I think it's going to play a large role in the development of these creative entrepreneurship centers,
Yeah.
whether in something that we have to actively actively learn more about as a center, whether we want to, for instance, as the garage or as an entrepreneurship center, develop our own AI platform that's going to, be helpful for student entrepreneurs, whether we need to find some way, hopefully not, but some way in the future to compete directly with these kinds of things. Say somebody develops an AI that is your, you know, entrepreneurship guide, your small business development guru. How does a space like this that is meant to provide that kind of direct and personal feedback on your business venture going to compete with something that can just operate in any web browser? I think that, working hard to dig deep on the stuff that the garage is already doing that AI cannot, touch, which is that this physical space, that direct connection with students, while also, playing to AI's strengths to develop programs and practices that utilize this new tech to, provide some specific resource for students. I think that's going to be something that the garage and, pretty much every incubator or a startup space for that matter is going to have to be prepared for.
Love it. Great way to end. Good bow, as you said, to put on it. I totally agree. Uh, both with where AI will be going, and with the need to balance that with some physical space that we know it can't replicate or replace. Jake, this has been absolutely wonderful. It was great to catch up with you, and a great way to kick off the season one, as we're calling it, I suppose, of This Should Work. And if anything else you want to plug or whatnot, do it now. Otherwise, that was a great way to end too.
All right. Well, I guess the last thing I'll plug is just the garage itself is always happy to share our findings and our, specific experience with entrepreneurship spaces with other entities that are trying to do the same thing. Many times we'll host tours for, universities who are local or university members who are flying in from anywhere else to come see the space. We're not a closed book here. We like to share our notes. We think that the rising tide raises all ships. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're starting a entrepreneurial space of your own or any kind of, student creative space, reach out to us at the garage. I think, I'm speaking for myself, but I can also speak for my team, is that we're always happy to, talk with, support, and engage with other people looking to do this in other places and other campuses and all over the country or around the world. And we think that the garage is pretty special, and we think that we have some great things to share.
Right on. All right, Jake Juracka, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jay.